Imagine surviving the battlefield, only to lose the ability to walk. A Black Ukrainian soldier, paralyzed but unbroken, is dragged before a Russian commander. Instead of mercy, he's greeted with laughter, cruel, mocking, humiliating. But here's the mistake: in trying to break him, the commander forgot one thing. Strength doesn't always come from your legs. And in the next few seconds, the room would discover exactly why mocking this soldier was the worst decision that commander ever made. A Black Ukrainian soldier, once a fierce fighter on the front lines, now sat in silence. His body bore the scars of a brutal firefight, the kind that reshapes not just muscle and bone, but the very soul of a man. A single round, fired in the chaos of battle, had torn through his spine, leaving him paralyzed from the waist down. From that moment, the battlefield became his past, and a chair became his prison. To the enemy, he looked broken. The Russians saw only weakness. A soldier who could no longer march, no longer charge, no longer carry a rifle across muddy trenches. To them, he was the image of defeat, a man reduced to half of what he once was. But to his comrades, he was something else entirely. They didn't see a chair. They didn't see the scar on his back. They saw the man who had carried wounded brothers out of burning villages, the man who had stood guard through freezing nights when others collapsed from exhaustion. They remembered the soldier who never abandoned his post, never left anyone behind, never lost the fight in his eyes even when the world tried to crush him. For them, he was still a brother. But inside, behind the quiet stare and the clenched jaw, the soldier carried a storm. He remembered the night of the ambush. The air thick with smoke, the sound of mortars ripping the earth apart. He remembered dragging a fellow soldier, blood pouring from his leg, when the bullet struck him down. He remembered lying there, staring at the sky as pain spread through his body like fire. In that moment, he thought it was over. Yet fate had other plans. He woke in a hospital, his body refusing to obey him, his legs nothing but heavy shadows of what they once were. The doctors told him the truth in a flat voice: he would never walk again. For many men, those words would have been a death sentence. But for him, it was something different, a challenge. Because standing tall doesn't always mean standing on your feet. The soldier understood something the enemy never would. Courage wasn't measured in steps. Strength wasn't measured in muscle. And dignity wasn't stolen just because your legs refused to move. He had lost the ability to walk, yes, but he hadn't lost his fire. He hadn't lost his will. He hadn't lost the part of himself that made him a soldier. But the Russians couldn't see that. When they captured him, they laughed. To them, he was the forgotten soldier, the one who should have faded into the background of war. A man left behind by his own body, pitied by his allies, mocked by his enemies. They saw only the chair, never the man who sat in it. And maybe that's what made them careless. Because when you underestimate someone, you blind yourself to the truth. You convince yourself that your power is absolute, that your opponent is finished. And in that blindness, you set yourself up for your own downfall. As the Russians dragged him before their commander, the room filled with arrogance. Officers smirked, soldiers whispered, and in the middle of it all, the paralyzed soldier sat in silence. They thought silence meant defeat. They thought stillness meant surrender. They thought immobility meant powerlessness. But silence can be sharper than a blade. And stillness can be the calm before a storm. The forgotten soldier wasn't forgotten at all. He was waiting. Watching. Measuring the arrogance of the man standing over him. A Russian commander, broad and confident, eyes gleaming with cruelty, ready to strip him of every ounce of dignity. The commander believed he was facing a cripple, a shell of a fighter, someone who could be mocked without consequence. But what he didn't know was that the man in the chair was still a warrior. His weapon wasn't his legs anymore. His weapon was unbreakable will. His weapon was the fire that refused to die. The forgotten soldier wasn't broken. He was simply underestimated. And soon, that mistake would cost the commander more than he ever imagined. The room was heavy with the stench of smoke, sweat, and arrogance. Cold light flickered from a single lamp above, casting long shadows across the concrete walls. Chains rattled as the guards shoved him forward, chairs scraping against the floor. A half-circle of Russian officers stood waiting, their boots polished, their coats dark and pressed, men who believed themselves untouchable. At the center of them all stood the commander. Broad shoulders, trimmed beard streaked with gray, medals flashing on his chest. He carried himself like a predator, head tilted, eyes scanning the soldier in the chair the way a wolf sizes up a wounded deer. He didn't speak at first. He circled. Step by step, his boots echoed in the silence, each sound heavier than the last. Finally, the commander leaned in, voice dripping with contempt. Look at you, he sneered. Ukraine sends crippled men to fight? This is what your army has become. Laughter broke out like a chain reaction. Officers smirked, soldiers chuckled, and the sound swelled into cruel amusement. To them, it wasn't just mockery, it was theater. Their commander was putting on a show, and the black soldier in the chair was their entertainment. The commander wasn't finished. He tapped the soldier's chair with his boot, smirking as if nudging a broken toy. Tell me, he said mockingly, do they will you onto the battlefield? Do you fight with your chair as a weapon? The laughter grew louder, sharper, bouncing off the walls like shrapnel. The soldier didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked, calm, unwavering. No twitch of the lips, no shake of the head, no reaction at all. And that silence irritated the commander more than any insult could have. So he pushed harder. The commander crouched low, close enough for his breath to touch the soldier's ear. His voice dropped to a whisper, venom disguised as words. You're not a man anymore. You're half a man. And yet they let you wear this uniform? He tugged at the soldier's collar with 2 fingers, sneering at the patches. Pathetic. The soldier's silence was deafening. His chest rose and fell, steady, calm, unbroken. His eyes didn't flinch. That composure cut deeper than the commander's words, but the Russian didn't realize it. Around the room, the officers chuckled uneasily now. Some laughed with obedience, not amusement, their eyes darting between the commander and the prisoner. Mockery has a way of turning sour when the target refuses to break. The harder the commander tried, the more it felt like he was mocking himself. Still, he pressed on. The commander straightened, pacing slowly. His voice rose, carrying through the room. This is Ukraine's hero? A crippled black man who can't even stand? This is who you send against Russia? No wonder your country burns. He expected another round of laughter. But this time, it fell flat. The officers shifted uncomfortably. The silence returned, heavier than before. The only sound was the scrape of the commander's boots across the floor. And in that silence, the soldier sat taller. Not with his body betrayed him. But with his presence. His calm was louder than the commander's taunts. His dignity, untouchable. That was the moment the balance shifted. The commander thought he was delivering humiliation, sharpening it like a knife, twisting it into the soldier's chest. But the blade didn't land where he wanted. Instead, it cut into his own pride. The more he mocked, the more his words bounced back, empty and powerless. Because true humiliation isn't when others laugh at you. It's when they laugh, and you don't care. The black soldier's silence wasn't weakness. It was defiance. It was louder than rage, sharper than any insult. And though the commander couldn't see it yet, that silence would become the crack in his armor. The mockery had begun. But so had the unraveling. The room fell quiet again, the commander's words hanging in the air like smoke. For a moment, even the laughter of the officers seemed to choke itself out. All eyes turned to the soldier in the chair, waiting for some kind of reaction, anger, despair, shame, anything. But there was nothing. He didn't flinch. He didn't bow his head. He sat as still as a stone, his gaze locked forward, his face carved into an expression of unshakable calm. The weight of his silence pressed against the room, heavier than the commander's taunts, heavier than the mocking laughter that had filled the air only seconds earlier. It was a silence that spoke louder than words ever could. Because silence, in the right hands, is not weakness. It's defiance. It's control. It's a weapon forged from patience and pride. And in that chair, paralyzed but unbroken, the soldier wielded it like a blade. Behind his eyes, there was fire. Not the flickering spark of desperation, not the dim glow of resignation. No, this was a fire that mocked back without speaking. It was the kind of fire that comes from enduring the unendurable. The kind of fire born from crawling through the mud with bullets slicing the air, from watching brothers bleed out beside you and still pressing forward. It was the kind of fire that even paralysis couldn't extinguish. And the commander, for all his arrogance, didn't see it. He saw a man who couldn't stand. A man whose legs were dead weight. A man who looked small in the shadow of his captors. What he didn't realize was that in mocking him, he wasn't breaking him, he was awakening him. The soldier's silence burned like acid in the commander's pride. Every second without a reaction was an insult, louder than a shouted curse. The commander wanted him to break. He wanted tears, rage, trembling hands, something, anything to prove that his cruelty had power. Instead, he got stillness. He got fire disguised as calm. And that terrified him, though he couldn't admit it. He leaned closer, his face inches away, trying to pierce through that wall of silence. He expected to see defeat in the soldier's eyes, maybe fear, maybe pain. But what he found was worse. He found defiance. He found unshakable will. He found the look of a man who had already faced death and refused to bow. The commander pulled back, unsettled. For a moment, his sneer faltered. He quickly covered it with another laugh, louder this time, harsher, as though volume could mask the crack in his confidence. His officers chuckled again, but it was forced now, thin and brittle. The silence of the soldier was spreading, seeping into the room like a slow poison. Because silence doesn't just resist, it infects. It makes men question. It makes them uncomfortable. It forces them to confront the fact that their power might not be absolute. The Russian officers began to shift on their feet. Their eyes darted between the commander and the prisoner. They were no longer laughing at the soldier, they were waiting to see who would break first. And in that moment, it was clear, the commander was already losing. The soldier hadn't moved. He hadn't spoken. But he didn't need to. His silence was louder than any speech, his stillness more commanding than any outburst. It was the calm before a storm the Russians didn't see coming. The commander thought he was mocking a cripple. What he didn't realize was that he had just ignited a fire. Not the fire of rage, but the fire of unbreakable will. The kind of will that turns humiliation into fuel, that transforms weakness into strength. And in the shadows of that cold, smoky room, a silent promise was being forged: this battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The commander had tried to strip him of his dignity. Instead, he handed him power. The fire behind those eyes was not just survival. It was warning. A warning the Russian commander would only understand when it was far too late. The commander's boots struck the concrete floor like a drumbeat, each step echoing in the suffocating silence the soldier had carved out. His chest was puffed, his metals glinting under the dim light. If silence had unsettled him, he wasn't about to admit it. Instead, he drowned it with noise, his own voice. He strutted like an actor on stage, words spilling from him in a mix of arrogance and venom. "You think your silence makes you strong?" He barked, spinning to face the captive. "It makes you nothing. It makes you weak. Look at you, half a man in a chair. A joke wearing a uniform." The officers chuckled, but not with the same vigor as before. Their laughter was forced now, shadows of loyalty rather than amusement. Still, the commander pressed on, eager to reclaim control of the room. He raised his arms, gesturing broadly as if addressing an audience. "Russia stands on the bones of men stronger than you. We are power. We are history. And you." He pointed a gloved finger at the soldier, sneering. "You are nothing but a crippled stain in that history. Forgotten before the war even ends." The soldier remained motionless, his gaze locked, that fire behind his eyes burning hotter with each insult. But the commander wasn't finished. He circled back, leaning in close again, his voice dripping with malice. "They say God watches over soldiers. Tell me, did God watch over you? Did he stop the bullet that shattered your spine? No. Even God has abandoned you." The words sliced through the room, heavy and cruel, designed not just to wound the body but to fracture the soul. The commander pulled back, smirking, convinced he had landed his strike. But the soldier's silence remained unbroken. And that silence was starting to haunt the commander. So he grew louder, desperate to fill the void. He turned to his officers, spreading his arms. "This is Ukraine's finest? This is the man they send to fight Russia? A crippled black man, wheeled into battle? What a pathetic army, what a pathetic country." The officers forced another laugh, but it cracked at the edges. Their eyes betrayed discomfort, unease. They weren't watching a commander breaking a prisoner anymore. They were watching a commander unravel in front of one. The boast had turned into desperation. Because boasting, at its core, is fragile. It's a shield made of paper, easily torn when the one you're mocking refuses to bend. The more the commander bragged about Russia's power, the weaker he looked. The more he mocked Ukraine, the more hollow his words sounded. And the more he tried to strip dignity from the paralyzed soldier, the more dignity clung to him like armor. Arrogance has a funny way of writing its own ending. And in that room, the ending was already taking shape. The soldier's silence wasn't silence anymore. It had become a mirror, reflecting the commander's pride back at him, magnified, exposed. Every word the commander spat was a confession, of fear, of insecurity, of the cracks forming in his own authority. The soldier didn't need to speak. His presence was enough. His unbroken gaze, his calm defiance, his refusal to be moved, that was his weapon. A weapon more dangerous than fists or rifles. A weapon that no bullet could destroy. The commander had turned his boast into a stage, and without realizing it, he had cast himself as the fool. His words, meant to humiliate, only made him smaller. His laughter, meant to belittle, only echoed hollow in the stale air. And his pride, meant to display strength, now reeked of fragility. The officers knew it. The guards sensed it. And deep down, so did the commander. He had mocked the soldier's body. He had mocked his race. He had mocked his God. But in doing so, he had revealed the truth: his power wasn't strength. It was noise. And noise fades. As the commander strutted, the soldier remained still, calm, steady, unbreakable. One man was paralyzed in body. The other, though he didn't know it yet, was paralyzed in spirit. And soon, the balance of power in that room would shift forever. The commander had mocked, he had laughed, he had paraded his arrogance like a crown. But arrogance blinds. And arrogance makes men careless. One step too close, that was all it took. The Russian commander leaned in, his face just inches away, eyes glittering with cruelty. He wanted to stare directly into the soldier's soul, to see defeat there, to drink it like a trophy. His voice dropped low, sharp as a knife. "You are nothing. Do you hear me? Nothing." But in that moment, he made a mistake. He forgot the man sitting before him wasn't broken, he was forged. The soldier's hand shot out. Fast. Precise. Years of training, reflexes honed in chaos, muscle memory etched into his very bones, they didn't vanish just because his legs no longer worked. His grip clamped down on the commander's wrist like iron. The commander froze, stunned. The room fell silent. That silence wasn't the heavy, passive silence of before. This was electric. Charged. Dangerous. Every officer in the room felt it, like the air had been ripped apart. The commander's bravado cracked in an instant. His eyes widened as he tried to pull his wrist free, but the soldier's grip was unyielding. Steel fingers dug into flesh, not just holding him, but owning him. In that single motion, the balance of power in the room flipped. The paralyzed soldier wasn't weak. He wasn't powerless. And now, the commander knew it. The soldier yanked, hard enough to drag the commander forward, nearly throwing him off balance. The commander stumbled, his metals clinking against his chest, his body jerking awkwardly as he struggled to regain footing. For the first time in this entire exchange, he wasn't the predator. He was prey. Gasps escaped from the officers lining the walls. Their commander, the man who had strutted like a king only seconds ago, was now being manhandled by the very man he called crippled. The humiliation was instant, raw, undeniable. The commander gritted his teeth, trying to snarl, but his face betrayed him. Behind the mask of anger was something far more dangerous for a man of his stature: fear. Because in that soldier's grip, he felt not just strength, but defiance. He felt the weight of every insult, every laugh, every arrogant word, all returned in one crushing hold. The soldier didn't speak. He didn't need to. His grip spoke for him. It said, "You can mock my body, but you will never own my spirit." The commander tried to wrench his arm away, but the soldier held fast, unblinking, calm. For the first time, it was the commander who looked trapped, the commander who looked weak. The officers shifted, some whispering, some stepping forward instinctively, unsure whether to intervene or let the spectacle burn into their memory. And the spectacle burned. Because this was no cripple. This was no forgotten man. This was a soldier who refused to bow, a soldier whose willpower turned silence into a weapon and grip into judgment. The commander's arrogance had led him to lean too close, and in doing so, he handed the soldier the chance to remind everyone in that room of a truth they had forgotten: paralysis doesn't mean powerless. When he finally released the commander's wrist, it wasn't mercy. It was a statement. The commander stumbled back, clutching his arm, eyes darting around the room, humiliated under the gaze of his own men. No one laughed now. The mocking was over. The balance had shifted, and the officers knew it. Their leader had just been undone by the very man he mocked. And in that cold, smoky room, one truth settled deep into every witness: strength isn't measured by the body. Strength lives in the will. And this soldier's will was unbreakable. The turn had come. And nothing would ever be the same again. The commander stumbled backward, clutching his wrist, his face a mask of disbelief. The swagger that had carried him through the room only minutes earlier was gone. He looked smaller now, weaker, as though the air itself had been sucked out of his chest. The sound of his boots scraping against the concrete echoed louder than his words ever had. His officers froze. Every single one of them stood motionless, caught between instinct and disbelief. Their eyes darted to their commander, then to the paralyzed soldier sitting in the chair, the same man they had mocked, ridiculed, and written off as powerless. Now, in a single motion, he had flipped the entire room on its head. No one was laughing anymore. The silence was suffocating. Not the silence of boredom, not the silence of fear before violence, but the silence that comes when men witness something they cannot explain. That single act had shattered the mockery in an instant. The soldier's grip had been brief, but its weight lingered. It wasn't just physical. It was psychological. It said something words never could: I am not broken. I am not weak. And you will never own me. The officers had seen their commander humiliate countless men before. They had watched him break spirits with words sharper than blades, with insults honed to destroy dignity. But here, his cruelty had failed. Here, in front of his own men, the crippled soldier had returned fire without saying a word. The commander tried to straighten himself, puffing out his chest, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. His pride was bleeding. His authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. The officers felt it. In armies, respect flows like blood, it sustains everything. But respect is fragile. And now, watching their commander falter in front of a paralyzed prisoner, that respect began to rot. The humiliation wasn't his alone. It stained the entire room, each officer feeling the weight of their leader's failure pressing down on them. And yet, all of it came from a man who could no longer stand. That realization sank deep. This wasn't a crippled man. This was a soldier who had faced death, been broken by bullets, and still returned with iron in his soul. A man who had survived battles they couldn't imagine, who had carried dignity through fire and loss. Sitting in that chair, he was taller than all of them. One of the younger officers, barely past 20, swallowed hard. His eyes flicked between the commander and the prisoner, and in that moment, respect shifted. It was no longer aimed at the man wearing medals. It was aimed at the man who needed none. The room's energy had changed completely. The mocking tone was gone. The laughter had evaporated. In its place stood a heavy awareness that they had underestimated something they couldn't crush. The commander, still shaken, barked out a laugh, trying to reclaim ground. But it was hollow, echoing awkwardly in the stale air. None of the officers joined him. They couldn't. The laughter wouldn't come. It felt wrong, like forcing joy at a funeral. He had lost them, and he knew it. The soldier didn't move. He didn't gloat. He didn't even blink. He sat still, steady, like a mountain that had withstood a storm. The fire in his eyes had grown brighter, but it wasn't wild. It was controlled, measured, the fire of a man who didn't need words or theatrics. And that made it even more terrifying. The commander realized, too late, that his mockery had backfired. He had tried to strip the soldier of his dignity, but in doing so, he had stripped away his own. He had tried to perform dominance for his men, but instead, he had shown weakness. The room had seen it. They had felt it. And nothing could erase it. The Black Ukrainian soldier, paralyzed but unbroken, had just rewritten the balance of power without ever leaving his chair. Suddenly, the commander's medals meant nothing. His uniform, his authority, his voice, none of it mattered. Because respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And in that room, it didn't belong to the commander anymore. It belonged to the soldier in the chair. And from that moment on, no one dared to laugh. Humiliation is a strange thing. It doesn't just stain the one mocked, it can boomerang, staining the one who throws it. And in that room, it had flipped like a blade turned inward. The Russian commander's face burned red. Not from rage alone, but from the shame of losing control. His bravado, once loud and intoxicating, now felt like a cheap costume slipping off in front of an unforgiving audience. He opened his mouth, as if words could rescue him, but nothing came out. The silence swallowed him whole. Everyone understood. The Black Ukrainian soldier, paralyzed, scarred, and confined to a chair, had stood taller than the man mocking him. Not physically. Not with swagger. But with something heavier, something unshakable. Dignity. The officers could feel it. Respect isn't commanded by shouting or medals pinned to a uniform. Respect is earned, often the hard way. And here, sitting in that chair, was a man who had already paid the highest price. The young officer who had looked at him before now stared openly, his chest tightening. He had grown up in an army that worshipped power, that measured worth by how loud a man could yell or how many men he could command. But in that moment, watching the soldier in silence, he realized he had never truly seen strength until now. The commander tried to puff up again, slamming his boots against the floor, straightening his shoulders as if volume and posture could erase what had just happened. But the room had already turned. His voice, when it finally came, sounded thinner, strained, as if even he didn't believe it anymore. "Do not be fooled," he barked, pointing a trembling finger at the prisoner. "This man is nothing. Nothing." But it didn't land. The words scattered like dry leaves in the wind, hollow and brittle. No one believed him. Not after what they had seen. The soldier's silence cut deeper than any rebuttal could. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to defend himself. His eyes, steady and unblinking, carried more weight than the commander's entire speech. That was the unbearable truth. The man in the chair didn't just survive the insult, he rose above it. Respect had shifted, and the commander couldn't pull it back. The officers stood awkwardly, unsure where to place their loyalty. Some looked down, ashamed. Others kept their eyes fixed on the soldier, unwilling to admit what they were feeling, but unable to deny it. Every second that passed was a second in which the commander's grip on them weakened. The commander's face twisted, searching desperately for control. But his enemy, the man he called crippled, broken, worthless, had already taken it from him without moving an inch. That truth gnawed at him, each second heavier than the last. And the soldier? He remained motionless. No smirk. No victory speech. Just calm, steady defiance. Because he knew the hardest-earned respect doesn't come from gloating. It comes from showing that no insult, no humiliation, no mockery, can take away what makes a man unbreakable. For the first time, the officers saw the commander differently. They saw cracks in the man they had followed. And they saw unshakable strength in the man they had mocked. That strength wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't even physical. It was the kind of strength that comes only from walking through fire, losing everything, and refusing to bow. The commander's humiliation deepened with every passing second. Because in that room, the hierarchy had inverted. The one in chains carried himself like a commander. And the commander, stripped of his aura, looked more like a fool than a leader. Respect had been earned the hard way. Not through fear. Not through cruelty. But through dignity unshaken, will unbroken, and silence louder than any weapon. And in that silence, every man in the room felt it. The Black Ukrainian soldier had won. Mockery is cheap. Courage is priceless. That truth would haunt the Russian commander long after that day. He thought he was putting on a show of dominance, thought his laughter and insults made him stronger. But humiliation has a way of backfiring. In mocking a paralyzed man, he had stripped himself bare, showing his own weakness to everyone watching. Because strength isn't measured by how loud you laugh at another's pain. Strength is measured by how much pain you can endure without surrendering who you are. The Black Ukrainian soldier had taught that lesson without a single speech, without even standing from his chair. He didn't trade insults. He didn't lash out in desperation. He simply was. Unshaken. Steady. And in that stillness, he became something far more powerful than the commander could ever hope to be. The officers felt it first. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. Where laughter once echoed, there was now shame, heavy and suffocating. Every pair of eyes betrayed it, a recognition that the man mocked as broken had just proven unbreakable. The commander tried to regain control, but control is not something you can force once it's lost. He stomped his boots, barked orders, raised his voice until it cracked. But no one truly heard him anymore. His words fell like stones into a bottomless well, loud at first, but fading into nothing. The soldier, meanwhile, sat in silence. But his silence wasn't empty. It was full of defiance, full of dignity, full of an unspoken truth that drowned out every insult. In that chair, he towered over them all. And so the lesson was etched. History does not remember the laughter of tyrants. It remembers the dignity of those they tried to break. No one would recall the commander's cheap words a year from now, but the image of a Black Ukrainian soldier, paralyzed yet unbending, would echo far beyond that room. Because sometimes the strongest soldiers are not the ones who stand tall. Sometimes they are the ones who refuse to kneel. For the commander, that realization cut deeper than any wound on the battlefield. He had wanted to turn the prisoner into a symbol of weakness. Instead, he had turned himself into a symbol of arrogance defeated. His officers would never look at him the same way again. Some would carry that moment in silence for the rest of their lives, remembering how respect shifted in an instant, from the man in power to the man in chains. And for the soldier, no words were needed. He had nothing left to prove. His body might never walk again, but his spirit had walked straight into immortality. He had stood taller than mockery, taller than cruelty, taller than hate. In wars, victories are often counted in battles won, territories captured, enemies destroyed. But sometimes, victory is measured differently. In dignity. In courage. In the refusal to be broken. That day, the paralyzed soldier achieved a victory no army could erase. And though the commander would never admit it out loud, he knew. Deep down, in the pit of his chest where pride could not protect him, he knew he had been defeated. Defeated not by bullets, not by bombs, but by a man who could not walk, yet refused to bow. And that is the kind of defeat that lingers forever.